back at it. You're We are back. We are about to start a new book. Happy Black History Month. Even though Black History is year round and every month is Black History Month, this is the month that the United States deems as Black History Month. So happy Black History Month. Our book this month is going to be focused on Black history as well. Well, it might not last us the whole month, but our next book is going to be focused on Black history because in schools, well, when I was in school, definitely, we were taught only about slavery when it came to Black history. And we know Rosa Parks, we know Martin Luther King Jr., we know Malcolm X through schools, we know Madam C.J. Walker, but Black history is so rich. So for our next book, we're going to read Black Fortunes, the story of 6 African Americans who survived slavery and became millionaires. I just think it's important that, we know these stories, we know these people's names. As I'm reading this, I'm finding a lot of parallels to today's times. So I just want to preface that there will be sad parts. We know the story of slavery. There will definitely be sad parts, but it also taps into the resilience of Black people. So I hope it can be a source of hope for you as well. But yeah, with that, we're going to jump into the book. Let me know as we're reading, as I drop the chapters, if you knew about these people. Some people I didn't know about until I read the book. So yeah, this is going to be our next book, Black Fortunes by Shamari Wills. Let's get it. Okay, introduction. I grew up hearing stories from my mother about Uncle Johnny, the millionaire. My great-great-uncle John Mott Drew, born in 1883, was a boisterous man with a hearty laugh who dressed in all-black three-piece suits and wore a white Panama hat on top of a head of wavy white hair. He was known for being frugal despite his wealth and gave the children in the family $2 bills and silver dollars for Christmas. Before he rose to millionaire status, John Drew was the son of a slave. His father, Napoleon Bonaparte Drew, was enslaved on a large plantation called Belle Meade in Powhatan, Virginia. Napoleon had a zealous work ethic and an innate sense of self-confidence, which he passed down to his children. After emancipation, he bought a farm in 1867 near the plantation where he had been enslaved and became the first Black person in Powhatan County to own property. In 1875, he rented out his farmland, and Napoleon moved north to Darby, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Pennsylvania, with his wife, 3 sons, and a daughter. When his children reached adulthood, Napoleon sold most of the land in Powhatan. "Take the money from my land and make something of yourselves," he told his children. In 1901, Simon Drew, his eldest son, opened an ice house in Darby where he sold oysters, beer, and ice cream. Simon was known for the parties he threw at his restaurant as well as for being a look-alike for Frederick Douglass, with long white hair, smoothed back tightly, and a distinguished beard. After opening a restaurant, he bought 4 apartment buildings in the Black suburbs of Philadelphia and became a landlord. His brother, John Mott Drew, was an even shrewder investor. John started his career in real estate like Simon, but he eventually branched out to other, more lucrative businesses. In 1919, he noticed that the people in the mixed-race towns of Yeadon and Darby, where he also lived, had no way to get to work in Philadelphia and nearby Lansdowne, Pennsylvania. He took matters into his own hands, bought a bus, and began driving a jitney route from the suburbs to the cities. When he founded the John Drew Bus Line, he became the first African American to own a bus line. The enterprise grew over time, adding 6 buses to his fleet and several dozen employees. In 1930, he sold his business to a larger conglomerate under the condition that it would retain his Black employees and never allow segregation on his bus route. John Drew was also a stock trader. He knew that directly trading stocks himself would prove extremely difficult and hired a white broker to trade secretly on his behalf. During the Roaring Twenties, John invested the profits from his bus company sale into the stock market and benefited from the historically profitable bull market. In the late 1920s, sensing that the roaring stock market had entered a bubble, he told his broker to pull his money out. He walked away with over 250,000, 3.5 million, just months before many investors were wiped out in the Great Crash of 1929. John purchased a local Negro League baseball team, the Derby Daisies. He operated the team for 2 years until it folded in 1932 due to low attendance, as during the Great Depression, fans had less money for recreational activities. John turned the ballpark into a gentleman's farm, furnishing it with livestock that grazed on the infield. John died without a will. His story made me realize that the economic achievement of African Americans dates further back than today's black elite. The creation of black wealth is an important but overlooked subject in the economic and social history of the United States. African Americans were treated as property during slavery and were stripped of their economic and social personhood, reduced to commodities to be controlled, managed, bought, sold, underwritten, and leveraged. Attaining economic independence and power was a revolutionary act. Black millionaires disrupt stereotypes of black economic impotence. They remind us that African Americans do not lack the desire or ability to work or build businesses and wealth, but that instead they have often had to overcome great struggles to achieve economic stability, let alone independence and power. Early in our country's history, African Americans who achieved wealth were often attacked, demonized, or swindled out of their money by those who knew the Jim Crow court system would offer no redress to a black person. The black elite in their first decades of existence survived assassination attempts, lynchings, frivolous lawsuits, and criminal cases, all meant to destroy or delegitimize their wealth. Madam C.J. Walker was memorialized as the first black millionaire, not because she was the first to achieve wealth. She was far from the first, but because she was one of the first African Americans to flaunt and claim her wealth openly and fearlessly. The earliest black millionaires were conditioned not to be so brazen. Black Fortunes tells the story of Mary Ellen Pleasant, Robert Reed Church, O.W. Gurley, Hannah Elias, Annie Turnbull Malone, and Madam C.J. Walker, America's first cohort of black millionaires in their journey to liberty and wealth. Mary Ellen Pleasant's story begins in the 1820s and spans nearly a century. She was a free black woman who was raised in New England during the whaling boom of the 1830s and 1840s that inspired Herman Melville's most famous work, Moby Dick. She left New England for California during the gold rush of 1849 and became wealthy as a commodity trader, a money lender, and the proprietress of high-end boarding homes. She used her wealth to fund John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry and supported refuge and civil rights activists and causes. Robert Reed Church was born a plantation slave during the peak of the cotton trade, the product of a liaison between a wealthy white steamboat captain and his black concubine. He escaped slavery during the Civil War and became one of the largest landowners in Memphis. Annie Malone was the daughter of slaves. She was abandoned at an early age and raised by her sister in Illinois. As a young woman, she invented a number of black hair products, which she later built into America's largest black hair brand. At the turn of the century, O.W. Gurley, a school teacher from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, built an all-black neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, called Greenwood, which became known as Black Wall Street. The enclave served as a refuge for African Americans seeking a middle-class life and a safe haven from the lynchings and racial violence of the South, until it was destroyed by a white mob in 1921 during the Tulsa race riots. Hannah Elias was the black mistress of a white New York millionaire who heaped money on her own. She used his gifts to decorate her mansion to look like Cleopatra's palace. When her wealth and affair with a white man were revealed, angry mobs set upon her house, and she was arrested. Elias eventually beat the charges and moved to Harlem, where she helped John Nail, a black real estate developer, turned the neighborhood into an enclave for New York's black residents. Researching the stories of these titans of industry were challenging because they died more than 100 years ago, with the exception of Annie Malone, who passed away in 1956. Few records exist concerning African Americans before 1865. At the time, they were often viewed as non citizens and seldom cataloged by census takers or vital record keepers. Further, in many cases, these men and women were self educated and could read but not write effectively, and as a result, they did not keep diaries or engage in letter writing. They had small families, and only a few of their children lived to adulthood, leaving virtually no surviving relatives to tell their stories directly. Therefore, I relied on extensive archival research. I painted the stories of these accomplished people by surveying their own writings and letters, newspaper clippings, and oral accounts by their contemporaries that were documented. I labored over any available vital records. In hundreds of hours of research, I have given an earnest effort to deliver an accurate and fair portrayal of these individuals' lives and their work. The establishment of wealth is fundamental to social and political progress. Wealth has the ability to transform communities and close gaps in racial disparities. During these individuals' lives, which span the 19th and early 20th centuries, an era when African Americans needed housing, jobs, and funding for political campaigns and activism, it was the black wealthy class that often supplied the means. Many successful black Americans, including the luminaries of black fortunes and my great great uncle, John Drew, had to use white proxies to perform financial transactions to avoid being excluded on the basis of race. Today, as Oprah Winfrey, Michael Jordan, and Robert Smith make up the first black cohort of black billionaires, it's important to not lose sight of the history and battles that were waged and are still being fought to make such achievement possible. These stories are a neglected part of not only black history, but also American history, and they deserve to be told and woven into the tapestry of our shared history. Through the stories of America's first black millionaires, we see the limitless potential of black Americans despite structural inequalities, and we can glimpse the hope for one day achieving racial economic parity. And that was the introduction. I'll probably add the prologue to this because it's also short. But for now, peace. Edit. We are reading Black Fortunes, and we are on the prologue. The first black millionaire. Let's get it. On a warm night in 1841, William Alexander Ledesoff sat on the porch of an old white house covered in vines in New Orleans with his fiancée, Hortense. As she leaned on William, she could tell that something was bothering him. Hortense looked into his heavy-lidded auburn eyes. "What is troubling you, William?" she asked, looking up at him with her big blue eyes, framed by blonde curls. Against his better judgment, he confided in her. He stammered as he tried to get the words out. He finally told her. Hortense's eyes filled with tears. As she took in his confession, she scanned his features. He had a round, pale face with a straight nose, ruddy cheeks, piercing, deep-set brown eyes, bushy sideburns, and curly brown hair that he wore slicked back with oil. As he cried, he confessed that he was from the Virgin Islands, the son of a Jewish, Danish sailor and merchant, and a black island woman. He had been passing for white since he had arrived in New Orleans from the Caribbean as a boy, rising from working on the docks to commanding a ship in his mid-20s. Hortense plunged her face into the sleeve of his velvet jacket and sobbed heavily. "My father will never let us marry, and I cannot deceive or disobey him. Our dream has ended, but I will love you as long as I live," she said. "Go, you must go," Hortense told him. "My heart will always belong to you. Run, William. I must tell my father," she shouted after him as he retreated into the night. Hortense came from an aristocratic New Orleans family that owned slaves and would strongly disapprove of Hortense marrying a man of color. After William left, she went inside the house and told her father about him. Incensed, her father announced that the wedding was off, dragged her to the door of her room, and pushed her inside. "You will never see that "You will never see that nigger again," he swore, turning the key and locking her in. The next day, William received a package from Hortense's father with the engagement ring inside and decided to leave New Orleans. He sold everything he owned and purchased a ship. The day before he was to leave the city, he was walking down Canal Street and was passed by a funeral procession. He stood in the doorway of the store and watched the mourners go by. He spotted Hortense's mother, father, and sister in one of the carriages, and his heart sank. That night, there was a knock on the door. When he opened it, he was greeted by a priest. The man handed William a small gold cross, which he immediately recognized as Hortense's. Hortense's last words were that she wanted you to have this, the priest told him. In 1841, William left New Orleans. He sailed to California, then a remote Mexican territory. As he stopped off the gangplank in his ship in Yerba Buena Cove, he saw a backwater of thick forests and green hills dotted with Indian communities, military forts, cattle farms, and Catholic missions. Deciding he would live openly as a mixed-race man, he settled in San Francisco and started an import-export company, shipping tallow and animal pelts from California to Hawaii and Alaska. Once that business turned a profit, he used the money to open a general store, a warehouse, a lumber yard, and a shipbuilding business. He also built San Francisco's first hotel. San Francisco had very few inhabitants at the time. William, still trying to mend his broken heart, seemed to relish the isolation. His only friends were his employees, a bartender at his hotel, and his black laundress. At night, they would go down to the beach on the northern coast of San Francisco to swim. Sometimes they just sit on the rocks, looking up at the moon, and talk until the sun came up, listening to the waves crash on the shore. In 1844, William, then Mexican California's most prominent resident, was granted citizenship by the Mexican government. In return for his allegiance, Mexico gave him more than 35,000 acres of undeveloped land. His acquisition made him the largest landowner in the area. William built a large mansion in the hills of San Francisco, which he referred to with tongue-in-cheek as the cottage. His house was a New Orleans-style home with dozens of rooms, a wraparound porch, and the state's only flower garden. His estate functioned as a de facto U.S. embassy in Mexican California territory. A convivial host, he received generals and politicians at his residence. He served his guests beer and meat and offered them cigars. He apologized for not having better whiskey, which was hard to come by in the West. "We get what we can get," he told them. "Would you like some tequila?" He spoke with a strange accent, a mix of his father's Danish, his mother's Caribbean patois, and a southern drawl. In 1846, when Mexico went to war with the United States, William switched his allegiance to the American and was appointed United States Vice Consul to Mexico. After the Mexican-American War ended and the U.S. annexed California, the U.S. government made William the treasurer of the territory. In 1847, he built California's first public school and a horse racing track for the citizens' entertainment. In 1848, when gold was discovered in the Sacramento Valley, the value of his property and business skyrocketed to over $1 million, making him the first African American to achieve a net worth of more than $1 million in the history of the United States. One spring night, William retired to bed in his quarters on the top floor of his mansion. The next morning, doctors pronounced him dead of brain fever. Flags in San Francisco were hung at half-mast, and Californians wept for the loss of one of their most beloved. After his death, Joseph Folsom, a real estate investor, traveled to the Virgin Islands and found William's estranged mother, Anna Marie Sparks, his sole known heir. He convinced her to sign over her son's property for a payment of $75,000, which back then would have equated to $2.1 million. The William estate was worth more than $1.4 million, which back then would have been $38 million. With the stroke of a pen, the fortune and legacy of America's first black millionaire was stolen. And that was the prologue. We will be back for chapter 1. Peace.